Welcome back to Rooted Exchange. I want to take a moment to talk about something I don't talk about very frequently or very openly, not because it's not important to me, but it's something that I have a hard time talking about openly. And so I think this really centers around, a moment in time where my son was having one of those full body toddler meltdowns, the kind that feels loud inside your body, even if he's not necessarily being loud on the outside. And I just remember thinking, I don't know how to sit with this. I don't know how to handle this. I don't know what to do. And immediately after that, there was a realization that, of course, I don't. No one had ever sat with me or helped me acknowledge big feelings in the moment. And it felt like two versions of me stood up in the same moment, the mother I wanted to be and the child I once was. And, becoming a mom exposed parts of me that were still unfinished, still tender, still unhealed. And it also made it clear, though, that there are things that I didn't want to tolerate anymore, or what I never received and wanted to carry forward into my own family and way of parenting with my child. And so that's why we're here today to talk about what it means to reparent ourselves while raising children. And really want to focus that around, how we can do that without shame, without urgency, without perfection, and without the myth that we should already know how to do that. So I am here today with Jenni Smith. She is an Oregon-based licensed clinical social worker who prioritizes parenting, the transition to parenthood, peri and postnatal care, and also repairing childhood trauma. So Jenni, welcome. I'm so glad you're here today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Jenni, before we dive into everything, for listeners who are meeting you for the first time, can you share a little bit about who you are and what brought you into this line of work?
Sure. I am originally from New York. So I spent the majority of my early years over here. And then after finishing my undergrad, on a whim, got in my car and drove to San Francisco for no reason whatsoever. And enjoyed that experience. Making my way up and down the West Coast from Seattle to Portland. Um, and all through those years, having a knowing that being in a helping field is what I wanted. It's what I knew I wanted to do. I just didn't quite know what that meant or how to create that. Um, and so a little bit later, maybe in my mid-20s, um, I had an experience, and a friend of mine, had an experience in her life, and it dealt with mental health. And there was a moment in supporting a friend of mine where I had this like, oh, I think I could do that. Oh, like, I think I could do that. And that kind of like, opened the doors of looking into, degrees and, you know, masters and things like that. So, um, throughout that process, like you were saying, there's all these moments in time where you're looking backwards of like, oh, what was that like for me? And where did that show up for me? And I had this realization that I wished that there was a me for me when I was 12. Like, I wish that there was a me for me when I was 15 or 17 or 22 finishing college and like wanting to do something else. Because I always felt like I knew therapy existed. I knew people were taking care of their mental health, but it felt so far away. It felt so far away. It felt so not inaccessible, but more, I don't really know what that is. Or, that's the lady in town who, does the therapy, and I think people go, but I don't really know. And I wish that I had a me, somebody who felt more like a real person, having real conversations. It wasn't stuffy. It wasn't rigid. And I didn't feel like I had that when I was younger. And I really wanted to like figure out how to bring that feeling to the work that I do. Yes, the work itself, but more so trying to figure out how do I bring that feeling of like, oh, I can just come here and say these things and do this work with this like really human being. Um, and then of course, absolutely everything changed when I had my own kids. When I had my first child, she's 5 now. There was a very stark realization of, oh, okay, there's a real gap here. Um, and so focusing on, perinatal and postpartum maternal mental health was not my initial trajectory for work, and quickly and with such clarity became my focus.
Yeah. Was there a moment when you became a mom or in a session or as you were thinking about your career when there was a moment that clicked when you realized that is a focus that you want to prioritize?
If I'm being honest, I don't think I had a specific moment. I think it was more a collection of moments, a collection of these experiences. Yes, I had like the major experiences, the really big experiences, in that early, mothering experience, but it was more the small ones, just a collection of the small moments in time where I was like, ooh, am I the only one that's feeling this?
Yeah.
Am I doing it right? What, where, how, what, what is happening? And so it was just all these little moments in time that added up to this, this feeling of, okay, there's some real work to be done here. And it's totally feasible. Like it's work that's absolutely feasible. It's work that's not out there in the distance. Like it's really possible to do this differently or to feel differently doing this.
Yeah. We'll talk about defining what it is in just a minute, but I do want to ask how has your work working with women and parents move through what we call matrescence, shape the lens you bring as a therapist today?
Because I sit with parents every day. I sit with my parents. I sit with my moms that I work with, and they're all in different phases of life, right? I work with new moms in their 20s and early 30s with newborns, but I also work with moms in their 50s and 60s whose kids are maybe older or maybe having different transitions in life. Maybe they're transitioning into high school or out of high school, or they're adults. Um, and so bringing that experience from a wider perspective, not to just narrow it to this like early postpartum newborn experience, but this transition into motherhood is ongoing. It
Yeah.
never stops. Like it's an ongoing experience. Every time your kid reaches a new milestone or has a new, so do you. And so it's a constant transition. This like, what does it mean to be a mother and becoming into motherhood? It's not a small experience, and it's not narrow, and it's not simple. It just lasts the entire time. You're constantly transitioning to a new phase of motherhood.
Yeah. I think sometimes we think of it like, oh, I became a mom. So that there is this time and space that it should sit in a container when reality shows us, right? We continue to grow throughout our lives. And of course, as our children grow. I want to back up a little second because you were talking about something. Um, I think that for me, becoming a mom felt a lot like adolescence. And you were talking about this shift and this big moment. And as for me, especially, it was, an identity shift that happens in your body, your emotions, your relationships, and this sense of time. Except in all of that, having the room to explore, there's this expectation as we become moms of composure and knowing how to do it right. So I've been experiencing or exploring something which I think people call temporal lag, which is this gap between the changes in your life and the way your nervous system is currently experiencing and trying to catch up to that. Motherhood happens pretty instantly, the act of becoming a mom. But as you're saying, these shifts happen over time. Your role changes overnight, your routines shift, but internally your body may still be living in last year's stress or last decade's survival strategies. And it's not because you're behind or you're doing something wrong. It's just how we process information and our experiences through life. And I'm curious if that is something that you experience with your practice, seeing where, mothers are trying to evolve, really stuck in these old patterns that we have created or experienced in our lives.
Yeah, it shows up in a lot of different ways. I find it shows up in the messages that we tell ourselves, right? It shows up in the systems that have been created that we have been using for years and years and years to help us make decisions or guide us in some way. And it's uncovering that these systems, these networks, whether that's a message, a belief, are just really unhelpful and unhealthy and frankly not ours. Like these beliefs that are created years ago, they don't belong to us, right? That it could be something like I'm a failure or I'm failing at this, or if I don't do this perfectly, like why do it at all? Or, if I don't get it right this time, is my kid ruined forever? These messages aren't ours. They were provided to us by our environments, the people in our lives, the things that we saw, the things that were told to us over and over and over again. And so over time, this unhelpful, systematic network belief system drives how we view ourselves and how we view our world and how we view, our relationship to other people. And so I find a lot in my work, it's uncovering, is there a network? Like, is there a system that is driving this that we can actually change? Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have, just because like we can identify something and we can actually change it. It doesn't have to stay that way.
I'm curious to get your perspective on this. Is that why perhaps some folks may feel that motherhood is so destabilizing or creating a little bit of that chaos? There's some sort of recognition that those parts aren't ours to hold.
I think, and of course, this is right anecdotal. I can't speak for all people from all
Okay.
times. Unless you've done the work already, unless you've previously established, I am made up of all these different parts, there's all these different me's that show up, and there's these messages. Unless you've already done that work, most of it just shows up as distress, as internal chaos, as this physical, somatic, disturbance, living in a constant state of crisis or fight or flight and never really feeling settled
Mm.
in our body. And so unless you've already really done a lot of that work, it just shows up in our body and we just have the feelings to go with it. And it really doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It
I
really
think
doesn't make any sense at all.
it doesn't. I think for me personally, there was a lot of like jarring effects to becoming a mom because while I had gone through years and years of therapy and thought I had managed some of these old wounds, a lot of them showed up pretty immediately after having a baby. And, you know, why do these old wounds reappear through these life transitions like this, especially as, folks who may not necessarily recognize them. There's something special about motherhood that helps shine a light on parts of our life that we wouldn't necessarily get otherwise.
Well, think of it this way, right? If there are these unhealthy or unhelpful parts of us or these experiences that have, you know, shifted us in some ways, we are really good at creating methods, coping skills, ways of tolerating our distress, ways of tolerating how we feel about these unhelpful messages or the narratives that we carry with us. Like, we're very good at creating coping skills for that, ways of tolerating that. We get really good at that. And then when you have a baby, we no longer have the ability, we no longer have access to those skills in that way because of the significant physical, emotional, spiritual, psychological shift that comes with having a baby, with becoming a mother. Those coping skills, those distress tolerance skills are no longer available to us because our brain has now changed, neurologically changed. So we don't have access to those skills anymore. So if you got really good at coping with it or managing it, that just kind of goes away. And so that like disturbance that you talk about, this like chaos of like, I was handling things pretty well, and now I feel like I have no handle on anything. And there's this other human I have to take care of, I have to keep alive. It's really jarring when you no longer have access to the things you've gotten really good at to help you through whatever difficult thing you're carrying with you. They just
Yeah.
kind of leave your brain
Yeah.
and you have to kind of start all over again.
It's true. You really do. And, you talked about the somatic pieces of that. I think a lot of women, before we, in, intellectualize the thing that's happening, we feel it in our bodies, that chaos. Can you tell us a little bit about how that presents itself? And obviously every woman is a little bit different, but what are some of the common ways it shows up somatically?
How doesn't it show up somatically? Right? It's everything. It could be even in the way your skin feels. It could even be the way you view your body. It could be the way that your body grows. It could be the way the hair grows, the way that your nail grows. It could be the way that you just feel muscularly. And then, of course, more largely, it shows up in, you know, like difficulty resting, wanting to rest, but feeling unable or incapable of actually resting, or just kind of giving into the pure exhaustion and kind of just collapsing into rest. It shows up in the way that our heart feels. It shows up in the way that our, body metabolizes nutrients, or the way that our digestion works, or the way that our breathing feels. It shows up almost in every way you could possibly imagine in our body. And then, of course, things like brain fog and difficulty with word finding and inability to communicate a message clearly, right? Forgetfulness, right? How many times have I found my keys in the refrigerator? Like at least a dozen, right? And, subsequently also finding the milk in the, cabinet or something. I think it shows up in every way possible in our body.
How how should we think of those signs as signals to that there's something deeper to explore? You know, I think sometimes we say, "Oh, it helps me acknowledge something that's happening in my body and where I'm at today." And how can we explore that a little bit further or use that as an identification tool when it shows up in our body?
It's tricky and complicated. And I think one of the things I really want to like speak to, because I think it's so common, is to simply say, like, how do we use what we're feeling in our body as an indicator, as a message to take care of ourselves, or to pay attention to something, or to focus on our body in a soothing or healing way, is also important to say that not everyone's body is a safe place, right? So not everybody's body is a safe vessel to explore. And so finding ways to create security and safety for each individual so that it's possible to engage with your body in a soothing or healing way is just important to note,
Mm.
right? Because a person may want to soothe their body from something, and they may want to say like, well, where is this coming from, or what is this attached to? But if that individual does not have security in their physical body to start with, that's a very difficult process. And that can happen in pregnancy, that can happen through loss, that can happen through the childbirth experience, that could happen in any sort of, you know, early postpartum experience where security and safety doesn't feel tangible in the physical body. It's also finding ways to create that safety so that we can explore it from a healing way.
Yeah. It's an interesting duality, right? Our bodies are
Mhm.
ours and also can be a place that doesn't create that safety and security for us as humans. How can we, I don't know, explore or understand which side we lean on that fence to know where to start to create that sense of security and knowing if not attacking, but if our body's attacking us in a way that doesn't create that safe space, how do we separate ourselves from it? Or is there a way to separate ourselves from it?
Yeah, it's complicated, right? I find it helpful to come up with more adaptive, more positive, more helpful narratives to draw from, right? So if there isn't an inherent, connection to security or safety in one's body, creating an opening to do so, right? So saying like, it's not safe for me to be here. My body doesn't feel safe. To saying like, I'm here, looking around the physical environment, naming things in that physical environment that you can associate safety with, like even just in the room that you're in, like looking around, is there anything particular about that room, a texture, a color, an item that you associate with safety? So first creating like an external association with safety so that it reminds our body, oh, I'm actually safe in this moment. I actually physically am safe in this moment. And I can name the things that I'm seeing, that I'm touching to help me create tangible association with it. Not imaginative or I'm visualizing. I'm actually going to create tangible, evidentiary like components of safety.
Yeah.
So we can tell our body, I know you don't feel safe, but I have very concrete reasons to tell you that we are actually in fact safe. Might we try offering our body a little soothing now? So sometimes starting with creating external safety.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to dig into the tools a little bit as well. But, I also want to touch on, this idea of our internal dialogue and our adult versions today. I think one of the most humbling realizations I've had through this transition to motherhood for myself was that when my son is upset, I'm not always the one responding necessarily. And you talked a lot about those narratives and dialogues that have been passed down to us from our families and life experiences uh, long before we became parents. And for me in particular, sometimes it's oftentimes a younger version of myself who learned how to make herself small or just try to deflect the situation to try to become invisible. And that's not something that you can do in motherhood, right? The coping skill is not a realistic one. And I think a lot of times these things can be intensified as you become a mom, yeah, experiencing world in the public or even in your own home and talking about that safety. Do you experience this in your practice, or do you find it a common experience that women and parents uh, identify or experience a younger version of themselves, like two ages inside of one body, um, kind of having this internal conflict?
Yeah, I also think it is fair in this moment to say, uh, this is me. I am it. I am in it, right? I see it in my practice, but I'm in it too. I'm in it with my clients. These are things that I am actively experiencing. So, might I have had a temper tantrum in my kitchen a couple weeks ago? Absolutely. Was I stomping my feet and like, kind of clenching my fists and throwing a little temper tantrum because, my daughter wasn't listening or my son was drawing on the walls or, the things that they do? Yeah, I had a little temper tantrum as if I was a 7-year-old who didn't get her way because my children weren't listening to the requests that I was making. So, yes, to answer your question, yes. But it's also me, right? I have engaged with my angsty teenager self as a parent. The angsty teenager that wants to roll her eyes and scoff and just kind of turn around and stomp away. And then I have this moment of like, I'm not 16 though. I'm the parent. Right. And so then you get this, like you were saying, this duality of like, I feel like a 16-year-old rolling my eyes and, you know, scoffing at whatever it was that my parent was asking of me. And then having a stark shift back into reality of saying like, it's me. I'm the one. It's me. I'm responsible. I'm the parent here. And it's very difficult. It's very, very challenging to live in both of those places, kind of riding that line of shifting in and out of these different parts of ourselves, shifting in and out of these different experiences that we've had.
Yeah,
It's very difficult.
it is very difficult. And I think it also took, me a long time to realize the difference of who is responding and know that it's always me, but which version of me in which moment is showing up and why. Those are questions I get to ask myself now, but I even now I still don't necessarily recognize them right away or in the moment. You know, how can mothers and parents tell when it's a different or when their inner child is driving the moment in some regard? Is there some telltale signs that can just help us better identify, oh, this is a moment to pause or reset so I can show up for my child, knowing that some other version of ourselves is coming to the party?
That feels maybe a little like a little two-part. On the one hand, mm, I want to just make a lot of space for that not to have to be the thing that we do in the moment, right? And to just give ourselves permission to take care of our own bodies in that moment, as we might be encouraging our child to do. We might be saying, take a deep breath or let's try to calm down. Like just giving ourselves permission to be present in the moment and take care of our own bodies and soothe our own system and find our way back to some state of regulation as best we can in that moment. And then maybe after the fact, maybe then a little bit later, reflecting, what was really hard about that? Like, was anybody else there? Right. And then we kind of can offer ourselves these questions. something that you were talking about earlier, this notion that there's all this pressure and these messages of like, I have to do it right and I need to be the best mom and I'm supposed to know how to do this. But I think it's really important to really give us a lot of space to have absolutely no idea what we're doing whatsoever and to have that just be okay.
Yeah.
Because if we are trying to be the best parent and do it the right way, and then we're facing this like moment of chaos and I feel chaotic and my kid is chaotic, but I'm supposed to know like what age am I and what part is here all at the same time. I don't find that to be really helpful. And so really giving yourself space to just be present with our body in that space, take care of our own body, soothe our own body, co-regulate with our kid if we can, and then give ourselves a little bit of time after the fact. And as you get a little bit more in tune with yourself and maybe as you get a little bit stronger in this practice for yourself, like you're more able to kind of stay in touch with those parts as they're happening. But it's a very difficult process to do. And for a lot of people it can be a really painful process. And so I really want to give parents and moms a much wider scope of space
Yeah.
to not have to do another thing that we're supposed to do, or that's like, yes, we want to do these things. They're very helpful. They're good for us. And it's a lot. So can we do, right? It's the thing that I even said to somebody yesterday, like, I need to do more and I need to like be able to do this and I need to show up for my kid this way. And I was like, but could we do less? Could we just do less? Might
Yeah.
that be okay too?
This is a very novel idea for me in this moment, but what you're describing is allowing ourselves to be messy, to lean into a moment that can create rupture with our spouse or child. And I don't think that's necessarily widely accepted or the experience that we want to evoke. And also, we're deeply human. How can we honor that that side of us that is human? And like you're saying, allow it to be messy, allow the rupture. We can come back. But we'll talk about repair as well. But even in that, we're not demonizing ourselves for making a mistake.
And there's a lot of talk right now about wanting to make sure we have a good, secure attachment with our kids. And I don't want to mess them up. And is this the thing that's going to, like, is this the moment in time that's going to mess them up forever? Is this it? Is this the moment? And the reality is no, right? That attachment that we build with our kids is millions of little moments in time that create that like positive safety connection that I don't have to be perfect and my kid doesn't have to be perfect to know that like I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. Your big feelings are okay. My big feelings are okay. This is messy. Emotions are messy. They're complicated. Life is messy. It's complicated. And I think the more we engage in the messiness of it, the stronger things actually become. Our kid doesn't need us to be unmessy. Our children don't need us to be perfect. They need us to be present. They need us to be there. And if our focus is do it the right way, or, did I get too angry? Did I yell? Did I say that thing too loud? Was I yelling at them? Is this the time that I broke it all for us? No, the messiness is real.
Yeah. I know I struggle a lot with perfectionism, and I toil with this question a lot with myself, is that if I'm always showing up as perfect and not showing a lot of big emotions around my son, I'm not necessarily modeling how to tackle or experience those big emotions for myself, for him. So,
Mhm.
A, I'm kind of avoiding my own feeling in the moment, which is also the thing, right? That he sees and notices and say, oh, well, that's how mommy handles it, right? Um, it's a hard pill to swallow, if I'm being honest, right? Because what you're talking about is all things that resonate with me, and how do I make sure that I show up and I don't mess up my kid. But sometimes this need for the lack of like the need to control everything so that my child has a good experience can also be the thing that is creating that negative experience for your child. Does that show up as well?
Absolutely. All the time. Yeah. I see that show up most often in feelings of trying to be in too many places at once. If I spend too much time at work, am I not home enough? If I spend too much time at home, am I not independent enough outside of the house? If I do too much of this, is it not enough of this? And I find the reality is that the notion of balance, like how do you balance all the things in motherhood? Like, I don't know if balance is the goal.
Mm.
Like, what are we trying to balance? Right? I think the goal is to be as kind and loving and gentle and patient with ourselves, especially in these early years, right? And I like to say this a lot, that postpartum is not 6 weeks, right? Postpartum is not 6 months. Postpartum is about 2 to 4 years for your physical body to recover from childbirth, to recover hormonally, to recover systematically, to find that sense of homeostasis, to engage with these very difficult and stark transitions that young children and babies go through. Postpartum really is about 2 to 4 years. Now, if you're an individual who has a second or a third child before that 2 to 4 years has come with your previous child, now we're talking about postpartum is 6 to 8 years or 8 to 10 years of like real external and internal recovery.
So it's not linear. It
It's not
compounds.
linear. Yeah, it can
Mm.
compound. And being as kind as possible to say, I'm not balancing it all, but I am doing my very best. And that best is also going to look different day to day. That best is also going to look different hour to hour. And that's okay.
You said earlier, really looking at, wanting a you for yourself when you were 12, a you for yourself when you became a mom. I really love this idea as we talk about reparenting ourselves, as creating a little mini version of ourselves who can be the voice of reason whenever we need, not even the voice of reason, the voice of compassion and love and kindness in moments where things are challenging or things are tough, or even when things are beautiful, and allowing ourselves to actually sit with happiness. I think we also don't allow ourselves happiness in a lot of cases because we're so worried about the negative parts of things. Is there a definition or a way we can think about this idea of reparenting, uh, to help visualize how it could show up for anyone out in the world right now who might be struggling with these transitions?
One of the things I try to do a lot in my practice with my clients is working on, I guess, what I like to call like values exploration, finding a few core values that fit who you are in your current state of life to use as a framework, as a guide, so that when we get lost in the thoughts, when we get lost in the joy, when we get lost in the difficult or the negative, we can kind of turn to some of these core values to help us remember, like, what is it that I'm trying to do here? Like, where is it I'm trying to go? For example, I'm happy to share that a couple of my values that I've, done this exploration with on my own is one of them came down to family and one of them was adventure. And so when I'm in the thick of it, when I am in the middle of supporting a tantrum or having a tantrum, I can turn to this value of adventure and help myself being like, oh, I'm in the adventure. This is part of my adventure. This is a difficult part of my adventure, but I'm on an adventure, one that I am excited to be in, even though this particular moment in time is really hard and really difficult. Difficulty and challenge is part of an adventure. Now, that's just for me personally, um, but having anchors for ourselves, things that keep us tethered to reality, tethered to our values, tethered to the things that are maybe unwavering for us, so that when we start to drift out or when the negative is so dark and so heavy, that even if it's not accessible in that moment, I know I can go get it. I know that I have an anchor. It does exist. It's somewhere. It's somewhere. Maybe it doesn't feel like it's right here, right now, but I know it's somewhere. And so, can I go find that anchor? Can I reach for that tether to pull me back into the present moment, the current time? And maybe with that anchor comes an attachment to the strengths that I know that I have, the 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 parts of me that I know are capable and competent and all the right. And so this is a little bit speaking to all those skills that we develop over the years that help us through difficult times or help guide us. Like, so really important. So finding an anchor, finding that could be a value, that could be a message for yourself, something to keep us tethered to our current present self, our current present time in a really adaptive, like helpful, positive way.
Yeah. I think this will manifest different for everyone, but going back to what you're saying, someone likened this to like being a ski path or cross country skis, right? Where people go over and over again. There's these deep trenches. Those are the past narratives we've created for ourselves. And so finding these moments where we want to get off that path is also very difficult. Are there a couple of tools or micro practices to kind of enable us to jump off of that path so we can practice something different? I think about, there was yelling in my family, and oftentimes my brain, while I don't actually yell at my child, wants to yell.
Mhm.
And so I have to guide myself off the path daily into the thing, right? How can we start to jump off of those old narratives? Are there a handful of micro practices that people can think about as, I guess, a way to get back to your anchors?
Sure. It's really interesting, the anecdote that you said right now of like, it's like I'm screaming in my head, but I don't want to do the screaming, but that's what I'm recalling, that's what I'm remembering, but it's not what I want to do, but it is also what I want to do. Finding ways to honor that feeling, not deny that feeling or not dismiss that feeling, but channeling it in a way that's more helpful and more regulating. So if internally you're having this experience of like, oh, I just want to scream. Okay, well, let's do some screaming. Why deny this experience, why dismiss the validity of this experience that you're having inside of, hey, this is what I remember. And I remember it in this unhelpful way, but it's where my body is right now. But I don't want to repeat that unhelpful thing. But also,
Mm.
I actually still really feel like screaming. So, okay, let's do some screaming. In I find a lot that in the thinking about regulating ourselves, finding our way back to our body, there's this notion that it is calming, that it is soothing, that it is introspective and soft. And right, so we're doing some deep breathing, we're doing some meditation, we're doing visualizations, and those are incredibly beneficial. And they're not always the most helpful in the moment. Regulating can be loud, it can be physical, it can be big and abrupt and messy, but can we engage in those practices in healthy ways?
What might that
So,
look like?
right, so we're going to do some screaming. Right? If I'm with my 5-year-old and my inside is like, I want to stomp around and scream, then I'm going to invite her to do some stomping around and some screaming. Say, I feel like I really need to have a really big, loud voice. Let's try that together. And we're going to do some loud, big voice, experiences. And we're going to stomp around together. And I'm going to give myself permission to feel that big experience inside my body. I can invite, my 5-year-old, she's old enough to do that with me. But I think there's this experience, this message or this experience of, if you're having that really intense feeling on the inside, that can't show up on the outside. We can't let that out. Like, I can't do that. Like, that's the thing that made it hard for me, and I don't want to do that. But there are lots of ways to validate that internal experience and transition that into a more helpful present day, like, regulating technique. So we're going to do some yelling, or we're going to do some, I encourage a lot of my clients to do you remember those, like, bop it clowns that you kind of bop the clown and it kind of bounces right back up, and you bop the
Yeah.
clown and it bounces right. We are going to order some bop it clowns from Amazon. Amazon about to have a surge in bop it clown sales. I'm not affiliated in any certain
Yes.
way. Um, but so we're going to get a bop it clown, right?
Mm.
We're going to we're going to make a mess. I'm going to make a mess. I'm going to get a canvas. And I'm going to get some paint, and I am going to make a mess. Because healing and regulating does not have to solely be calming and soothing. It's not always what our body needs most.
Yeah.
Our body sometimes needs to be loud and big and take up space
Yeah.
to feel calm.
I think that might be, one of the less talked about or minimized portions of becoming who we are, right? Is that we don't have to intellectualize or verbalize everything. We talked a lot about how it shows up in our bodies. Sometimes that is a physical activity that is required. And how can we bring that to ourselves and also model that as a safe outlet in front of our children as an option for them as well when they feel it? Be able to signal, I'm having a big feeling. It feels like this. I need this to make it happen. Is there a space where, obviously, you have a kiddo who's only 2 and that may not land as well? Uh, is there a way that you can create space to do that with your kids? And is also a time when we need to process that independent of our children?
Yeah. As you were talking, I was kind of envisioning, right, this notion of reparenting and not wanting to repeat old patterns and wanting to kind of change maybe how we show up for our kids. And I had this kind of picture in my head about when the babies are really small, there's kind of just this, like, rocking that happens, right? We rock the baby side to side. And I don't know if this happened to you at all, but when the kiddos get a little bit bigger, we're not picking them out of the crib and there isn't that like rocking that's happening. But sometimes I'll be in the kitchen and I find myself still kind of like rocking back and forth, even though I'm not holding a baby in my arms. And so I think about that in terms of like, how do we care for ourselves? So if there's something happening, like, why wouldn't it be okay to give ourselves that kind of firm hug, embrace, and rock back and forth as if we were being rocked back and forth, because that's what we did for the babies to help them know that they're safe and help to them know that they're loved and help them know that they're okay to have this difficult moment that they're having. So why can't we do the same things that we do for them to ourselves? Right. And so for the 2-year-old, right, he is capable of, right, giving himself a big bear hug. And then we're going to, rock side to side and we're going to sit on the floor with our legs crossed and we're going to repeat a couple of words over and over again, ones that he's, familiar with or, has access to. Um, and then later, if you have a moment by yourself, if you have a moment, engaging with yourself in that same way that it might have felt really good to have someone engage with you when you were small, right? What would have felt so good when you were 5? At the end of a hard day at school, and you followed all the rules and you did all the things right at school, and then you leave school and, you know, I just want to melt, right? But you're an adult. So, what would have felt so good? So soothing to have someone offer you. There's a lot we can do for ourselves in that way.
Yeah. We've been talking a little bit about, this rupture and repair. And I think what you're describing sounds to me like, how can we also repair for ourselves, right? Be that voice. We default to the critic in our brain and not the kind one. It's a lot easier for us, especially as moms and parents, to show up with that kindness and compassion for our kiddos. But at the end of the day, I think some of those hard thoughts, as you were saying, I think that narrative, like, oh, I wish I did this or I wish I did it differently, uh, creeps back up. It's part of, how we were raised and what we may not have gotten. So I really love this idea of wrapping up our day or hard moments with something that went well or something that you wish you could tell yourself or wish you, had that moment to hear that from somebody else. What would it look like?
Yeah.
As we dig into repair, there are a lot of mothers out there who didn't experience repair growing up. I think there's a lot of generational differences between our generation, our parents, and that of our grandparents. But as we look at changing that narrative, where does repair begin?
I think I think maybe in a way repair could begin with permission, self-permission to in order, right? So in order to repair, there has to be an understanding that something happened that needs to be repaired. And so whatever that thing is, there needs to be some permission to repair something. In order to repair something, like if you're choosing to want to repair something, there has to be an understanding and acceptance that I may have not done something that felt good. I may not have done something that I liked. I think I maybe spoke to my child in a way that didn't feel good for me. I can't imagine it felt good for them. That didn't feel good for me. So, in order to access repair, there has to be a gentle permission, willingness to to accept and to make a connection that maybe I did something that I didn't feel great about. What do I want to do about that? Right? And so staying in old patterns, I might just sit in a shame pit for a long time, or I might go down a shame guilt spiral. So there has to be permission and space for mistakes to happen. We can't repair something that we aren't safe enough to acknowledge happened in the first place.
This is really important. I want to talk about this for a second. I think you and I had touched on this, that growth and healing and repair doesn't always feel good. It doesn't always feel warm. Oftentimes I don't think it feels lovely at all. And growth doesn't necessarily feel like relief. Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's disorienting. Sometimes it's just downright difficult. Why doesn't growth need to feel good for it to be real? Or how can we lean into this idea that this growth or this evolution, this transition in making those adjustments to lead with compassion doesn't always feel like a warm hug?
Maybe for a moment, taking right, like the emotional person out of it for a moment, and just thinking about our bodies as systems. When something is changing inside of us, our muscles are changing. There is neuroplasticity happening in our brain. We are actually creating new neurological pathways. When we challenge something old with a desire for something new, that is actual change happening in our brain. That's actual change happening in our muscles and our tendons, in the connective tissue in our bodies, right? There's actual physical change that's happening in our bodies when we challenge something or when we are being challenged by something. It's not just an emotional experience. It's not just saying this feels difficult. I'm having a feeling about it. It's physiological. It's happening in our physical being. And so it makes a lot of sense that growth could be uncomfortable because our body is experiencing it in a physiological way. We are creating actual new pathways of thinking in our brain, and that will impact us. That isn't always comfortable. Right. And so one of the things that I often encourage is a practice of getting comfortable in the stillness of discomfort.
Mm.
Can we learn to get comfortable and sit in the stillness of the discomfort? We don't need to fight it. We don't need to fix it. It can just be, but can we learn to sit with it so the growth can occur?
Yeah. I think a lot of us learned that discomfort equates to insecurity or discomfort in, right, or feeling unsafe. How now it's going to evolve for everybody, but how can we discern and separate discomfort that signals danger and discomfort that signals growth? Because I think a lot of times it shows up in the same way in our body, and we have to separate them.
Sure. I can offer something that I use for myself. It's something that I offer others. And again, I might offer something and take it or leave it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But something I do for myself often is I ask myself, am I responding to a story that I've made up in my head? Have I made something up in my head that I am responding to, or is the thing I'm responding to actually happening? And it gives us a chance to create a future present or a past present connection, because the distress that we often feel is connected to something we are remembering that has happened in the past or something that I have decided is going to happen in the future. And so if I can ask myself, what is the story I'm telling myself about this situation right now? Right? What is the story that I'm creating about this moment in time? And if the actual environment does not accurately represent the story that I've made up, can I then take a pause, come back to the present and say, what is actually happening then? Then what is actually happening? Right? For example, right? The baby cries, you go in, you pick the baby up, but the baby doesn't stop crying, right? The last time I picked the baby up, I rocked the baby, we see the baby stop crying, and then I put the baby down or, soothe the baby and the baby. So this time I go in, I pick up the baby, I did the same thing I did last time, expecting that same, and the baby does not stop crying, or the thing is not working to help the child soothe or regulate or feel better. And so something that could happen is say, oh, I'm not doing it right. Right? I'm not doing it right. I'm doing a bad job, or I'm failing at this. And so if you take a moment to pause and say, well, what story have I made up? Well, I've made up that because it didn't work the same way last time, that I'm now failing at this. When in reality, you got up out of bed, you went to that baby, or you went to that child, you sat with that child, you engaged physically with a soothing touch with that child. Maybe you are speaking to that child. Maybe you are doing all the things to soothe that child. Babies are going to cry. Kids are going to be dysregulated. But you're not failing because you're doing all the things that you are meant and supposed to be doing to soothe that baby. It doesn't always work because children and babies are humans with their own needs and their own desires and their own willpower and their own, right? And so if I can stop and say, what is the story I'm telling myself about this situation right now? To just take a step outside and observe. It's like if I could take a step outside of myself and observe myself from the outside and say, well, what am I telling myself about this right now? Am I a failure? Am I doing it wrong? Am I ruining my kid? Am I the worst? Am I the worst mother in the world? Right? Is this the moment in time that I've messed up my kid? Because often the story that we are telling ourselves is not an accurate representation of what's actually happening.
That's it's really seems challenging in the moment, right? As we think about, okay, well, we're challenging ourselves in that moment to say, am I believing what I'm actually thinking right now? I guess, does that identification tool come into play here to say, wait a second, it, that thing is from past me, or as you're saying, that thing is future me, to use that grounding technique, that jumping off the path, to then be able to address it? Um, or is it more just kind of acknowledging in the moment?
I think it's a lot of acknowledging in the moment, right? Of staying as present as possible. And if that present moment is really uncomfortable, what can we do for our bodies? Right? What can we do for my body in that moment so that I can tolerate the discomfort of this moment? And then maybe that question can come, right? So maybe the question comes after.
Maybe that's a question as well, right? It's like, is that okay to say, I'm not okay right now? I'm not equipped. I'm not intellectually or emotionally prepared to acknowledge that and say, I'm gonna hold a container for that when I'm can create that space when I'm not in front of my child to react or realize or whatever needs to happen in that moment because I'm not in a place where I can address it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the reality is, I don't always know what to do. We don't always know the right next thing to do. Really, we're kind of just making it up as we go. There's no book. You don't have a baby and they say, here's your manual of all the things that you need to know to keep this little baby alive and to raise it into a, healthy, functioning adult human being. There's no manual, there's no book. So absolutely, there's going to be moments of like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is really hard and I'm not okay. And that's okay. I don't have to be okay all the time. I don't have to be okay, right? So I don't have to be okay to learn that I can still do this. I don't have to be okay to know that I will be okay, right? Right? So it's like giving ourselves space. Like, I can learn that when I'm not okay, I'm still safe and I'm still loved and I'm still capable or competent or whatever it is that you kind of like want to connect with. We don't have to be okay to have space to learn how to be okay.
This is such important conversation and dialogue. I know that there are so many women out there who are constantly fighting with these same questions inside of their mind. As we think about all of the pieces that we've been talking about today, I hope that there's, some great wisdom and an insight that you've shared. But is there one thing, as we look at this transition as not a singular moment in time, it's an ongoing effort, a piece of advice or a piece of compassion that you you would offer to anyone listening that they can carry forward from this?
Yeah, sure. I think I think the message I try to convey most, both to myself and to the folks that I work with, is the goal isn't perfection, it's presence. We are not aiming for perfection, we are aiming for presence. Can I stay present long enough to learn from this experience? Can I stay present long enough to experience the joy, to safely experience the discomfort or the pain of this moment? Can I stay present enough to experience it, to learn from it, to grow from it, to tolerate it, to change it, whatever it is that we need to do, right? The goal is not perfection, it's presence.
Yeah. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today. It has really been my pleasure. And, to every mother who's listening, I think, some of the amazing things that we talked about is that, you don't have to be healed to be whole. You don't have to feel good while growing. It's okay to stumble along the way, and you are allowed to repair again and again and again. Did I cut out?
No, we just froze.
Oh, of
Hold
course I
on.
did. That's okay. Can you?
I think we're back. Okay,
We're
sorry.
back. That's okay.
But I missed the last couple things that you said.
That's okay. I'll just say, I just want to say, well, Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really special to have you on the show today.
I've enjoyed this so much. I'm so grateful that you're creating more space for conversations like this to be happening. There's so much shame and guilt and pressure around motherhood, especially now with the amount of access to information and the amount of access to seeing other people's experiences with parenting and mothering. Um, Making room for a shame-free, judgment-free place to learn and grow and be honest and be raw and be vulnerable. So thank you for making room for these conversations to happen.